The concept of the noble savage states that people are born innocent, that man is naturally peaceful, that simple tribal societies are based on harmony among people and with nature. Whether you are a believer or not, you probably recognize that this is quite different from, for example, the Christian religious concept of being born in sin, or the Hindu and Buddhist concept of karma. This video will show that the idea of the noble savage is also factually wrong, which is why it's usually called the myth of the noble savage. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, the founders of socialist Marxist ideology, and many other socialists, including Marxists in colleges and schools, were or are proponents of this myth. They also hold that as society develops, people get corrupted and exploited, especially by Western culture, private property, and competitive capitalism. The myth of the noble savage has perhaps never been more popular than it is today, having insidiously worked its way into entertainment, media, education, and policy. It is absolutely essential to Marxist ideology. Many of us have watched anthropological, nature, and history documentaries. For example, about the Yanomami tribe in the Amazon, North American Indians, Australian Aborigines, and so on. These documentaries will have shown you how they, the quote-unquote noble savages, hunt, gather, extract medicine from plants, and make simple weapons. They depend on their intelligence and persistence to survive. However, most of these documentaries distort the truth in one major aspect.
Help the Yanomami Indians to retain a portion of their identity, beyond the reach of civilization's fatal side effects, against which their weapons are useless, and to live a while longer in peace.
The filmmakers claim that so-called civilization is wreaking havoc on people who just want to live in peace. This is not true. Simple tribal societies, like the Yanomami in Brazil and Venezuela, are based on violence, not peace. There are no noble savages. Here's the proof. The Yanomami tribe were studied in the 1960s by American anthropologist Dr. Napoleon Chagnon. Chagnon is the world's best known, greatest, and the most controversial anthropologist. He is a pioneer of scientific anthropology. Living deep in the rainforest, the Yanomami he studied had no prior contact with the outside world, and were hence one of the last completely natural cultures. Controversially, Dr. Chagnon discovered that the Yanomami in different villages were constantly waging war on and raiding each other, including killing members of other villages. Through years of careful research, he found that a Yanomami village typically consists of relatives from two male lines, who exchange cousins in marriage. This means that warfare between villages was also warfare between families. Tribal warfare is not just over scarce resources, but mainly over women, the chance to father children. Hence, all early human society was characterized by such violence over the redistribution of resources and mates. Today, the redistribution of the existing is part of socialist Marxist ideology. Creation of the new, on the other hand, is connected to Western civilization, free enterprise, science, innovation, and capitalism. Evolution, or, if you prefer, adaptation, rewarded strong, violent, and competitive men with more offspring, who in turn inherited these traits. There are hence no noble savages, but instead strong, violent, and competitive tribal people. And it is such people that all of us today descend from. Clearly, if you're waging war against members of different villages and families within your own tribe, then you'd also wage war against people who don't look like you. People of different race, say. Such intertribal and interracial warfare is typical of tribal societies. Violence and racism, not peace and harmony, are hence the natural state of humanity. This is in direct contradiction to the myth of the noble savage that underlies Marxist ideology. It gets even more interesting. In his book, Noble Savages, Chagnon describes how the American Anthropological Association, basically an association of anthropology college professors, has been attacking his findings and his person, and has suppressed his research. Many anthropologists are not real scientists who go where the evidence leads them. Instead, they have already made up their minds and then try to bend the truth to fit their Marxist dogma. When Chagnon's research called this anthropological dogma into question, his opponents accused him of deliberately introducing measles into the Yanomami and compared him to Nazi doctor Joseph Mengele. These personal attacks had the effect that Chagnon was not permitted by Brazilian and Venezuelan authorities to continue his research further. Marxist, fake anthropologists literally suppressed real anthropological research. There is much more evidence that Chagnon is right. African tribes and kingdoms fought, enslaved, and annihilated each other. During the Bantu expansion, immigrant tribes, like the Zulu and Xhosa, who dominate South Africa today, conquered, displaced, and killed simpler South African, quote-unquote, native tribes, like the Khoi Bushmen. The Aztec culture of what is today central Mexico was ruled by a totalitarian emperor. It featured frequent wars between different cities in the empire to establish political dominance, and saw horrific torture and killing, during which sometimes up to 20,000 people a day were murdered by having their hearts cut out while still alive. More recently, members of the Hutu tribe in Africa killed around 1 million Tutsi in a genocide perpetrated mainly with machetes. As human society becomes more complex, the scale of violence became larger as well, even industrialized. The Nazis were nationalist socialists who annihilated millions of people. Soviet communists, who were in essence globalist socialists, killed millions of Ukrainians, Kulak peasants, and political opponents. Today, socialists sometimes call themselves postmodernist, indicating that they see themselves as more enlightened, pushing society beyond the quote-unquote evils of Western civilization, individual freedom, private property, and free markets. But a more apt term is pre-modernist. Even better is regressionist, because their ideology is about regressing society back to a quote-unquote natural state of humanity, violence over the redistribution of existing resources, aka socialism. This means that they first have to destroy modern, enlightened Western civilization. Western civilization has harvested man's aggressive, violent, and competitive impulses, and channeled them toward more constructive purposes than eternal tribal warfare over food and women. Redistributing warriors fighting over existing resources became creating inventors, scientists, businessmen, workers generating new wealth, opportunity, happiness. Western civilization produces scientific and technological progress, invention, the developments of new and better products, the pursuit of happiness, available not just to kings, queens, and chieftains, but to everyone. Historically, the socialist hell only became somewhat apparent in the West, when after the death of Joseph Stalin, information about millions of dead bodies, starvation, oppression, and gulags reached the West through the Iron Curtain during the Cold War. Today, it's visible in places like Venezuela and North Korea. However, Marxists in the West often didn't change their mind. Instead, they quote-unquote changed their clothes, camouflaged themselves, for example, as professors in colleges, especially in fields such as gender studies, anthropology, and so on. Due to a decade-long subversion of the education system, starting in the 1960s, along with politically biased hiring, the humanities today are almost completely staffed with these regressionists, as are the social sciences. Even the sciences and engineering departments are being impacted, for example, via staff in the diversity units. Most students wishing to further their education in college will unfortunately have to have contact with these people. But even in its most basic assumption, Marxism is wrong. Natural human society is violent, not peaceful. This means that all of us are ultimately descendants of perpetrators, not, as far leftist social justice warriors claim, victims. All our early ancestors were guilty of conquest and murder, even if they themselves were later conquered by others. Socialists want to regress human society into this natural state of violence and poverty. Behind their promises of diversity, equity, social justice, is a false ideology that in the last 100 years alone has cost close to 400 million people their lives, and has kept billions more in chains and poverty. So keep your eyes and ears open, and don't get conned. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. You can support our work here. Thank you.